Good morning. Oh, come on, seriously. Come on, I've got to talk for 20 minutes. Good morning. Thank you. As you can appreciate, and thanks for that, this is a little bit odd for me because I'm used to sitting in a soundproof room on my own and not having many faces looking at me going, be interesting, say interesting things. It's just people sat in their cars or in their kitchens listening on the radio. I am the breakfast show presenter off BBC WM 95.6. It's a job that I do Monday to Friday. We're on air between 6 and 9. That means my alarm goes off at 3:45 in the morning, which is obscene. It's the middle of the night, effectively. That's not early. That's just the night before. And what I am in my role as a presenter is I am the end product of a lot of work that has been put in by a lot of very talented people. I have a great team that work on the show, some producers, some reporters, and what they do is they form the show and put the show together. So we will have a meeting. For instance, we had a meeting the other day. There was a story about the government was going to be stepping in, possibly to take over children's services at Birmingham City Council. That started with our political reporter who'd found that out. She brought it to a meeting. I was at the meeting. Obviously, she was at the meeting. My producer, Liz, was at the meeting. My editor, Gareth, was at the meeting. A couple of the reporters were at the meeting. We then decide that this is the story we're going to do as our lead story the next day. So the producers and the reporters start to speak to people who can speak to us about this story. So we speak to the man who's in charge of children's services at Birmingham City Council. My producer rings him, sees if he'll come on the show. Yes, he will. One of the reporters gets in touch with the British Association of Social Workers. Will they come on the show and talk? Yes, they will. So they're booked in for the next day. Now, they don't just ring and say, "Hiya, can you do that? Thanks very much. See you, bye." Click. They talk through the story with them, and they construct what's called a brief. So that when I come in, I can see we're going to speak to Peter Hay. I know what his job title is. I know what his history is with this job. I know what he's said about it in the past. I know what people have said about him in the past. So I know where we can take the interview and the things I can challenge him on. So that's the producer sorted. That's the reporters who have got their jobs to do. The editor runs the radio station. So as important as breakfast is, he does have other things to do. He just keeps half an eye on it. Me, in my role as being a tremendously grateful presenter, naff off home. I go home for a sleep. So they're all working on this. See you later, see you in the morning, cha. And I'm gone by about 11:30, midday. And there's a reason for that. One, I'm not a journalist. And as the role as a presenter, the visible face of the breakfast show, there's other things you have to do. Things like this, giving talks, going to presentations, opening fates is the one that will come around a lot during the summer, and that's what I do during the day. And then about 4:30 in the afternoon, I'll ring back in to the station, find what are we doing as the lead story, who is it we're going to be speaking to, what's the angle we're going to take? And then I spend about an hour or so researching all of that and making sure that I'm ready to interview the different people the next morning. You have to become pretty knowledgeable about stuff pretty quickly. And the sad thing is, we did the story, I'm trying to think now, Wednesday, Thursday morning. 9 o'clock on that morning, I could have told you anything you wanted to know about Birmingham City Council's children's services, about the pricing structure for social workers and agency workers, the different rates that they get, the different pressures that they're under. Friday morning, couldn't have told you a thing. It's gone and we're on to the next show, and you're learning about the next thing. I've been with the BBC about 6 years. Before that, I actually worked in commercial radio. I actually worked for Heart in Birmingham. I produced Ed James for about 6 years. And I'd worked in commercial radio for about 20 years well, actually, no, about 16 years, aging myself. Worked in commercial radio for about 16 years before going to the BBC. The big difference between the two is commercial radio is exactly that. It's the money. That's what the concern is. It's being entertaining. It's playing great music. It's giving away great prizes. Well, that's not what working for BBC Local Radio is about. BBC Local Radio is about finding out the news that's going on in your community, in your area, and then in the wider UK, and then in the wider world. My job as breakfast show presenter is so, you may have seen the TV ads with my big bearded moon face gurning out at you. And one of the things I say in it, which remains true, is when you wake up in the morning, you want to know that everything is okay. And whether you do that by turning on BBC Breakfast, or you do that by checking your app, or you do that by turning on the radio, that's the thing that's in your mind of, is everything all right? Has anything happened? Is there anything going on that I need to know about? And it's my job to say, well, yes, it is. Or, in some very rare cases, no, it isn't. And that's when, again, your role changes. You become, for instance, I think the annual event that affects us all is when we get very unprepared for weather. And the snow falls, and everything gets completely gridlocked. My role changes again. I'm not there to be the person who kind of gets you up in the morning and brings you the news and maybe has a bit of a chat and a bit of a laugh on the radio. I'm the guy that's got to bring you that information. Is my children or my grandchildren's school open or closed? Is the road that I use every day, is that passable? Is the bus service I'm going to be going on, is that going to work? And that's what we do. And again, I don't do it myself, or I don't do it by myself. I have other people. We have Lucia that does traffic and travel on the show. She works for a company called Inrix, who provide all of that. We have Daz, who is my sports guy, and he's a sports guy, you know, most of the time, but we'll rope him in and do other things with him. Because when it isn't information-heavy days, like what we call snow days, weather days, we do like to have a little bit of fun. So during the summer, when the football was off, Daz and I decided we would challenge each other to different sports. So we tried cricket, at which we were both universally awful. We tried dodgeball. Anybody tried dodgeball? Anybody ever had a go at dodgeball? No, it's literally as it sounds. Someone throws a ball at you and you try and dodge it. It's vicious. And I was just the biggest target on the court. It was impossible. I was never going to win. And we do this and we record it and we bring it to the radio. And the idea is that as well as bringing the news of a more serious nature, we also like to have a laugh. Because nobody who listens to the radio or tunes into the TV in the morning doesn't want to at least smile in some way. Now, there's plenty I could talk about, but I think one of the best things to do to give you an idea as to what I do and what the BBC does and what BBC Local Radio does is kind of get you to ask questions. I could talk for goodness knows how long. So does anybody have a question about presenting on the radio, about becoming a journalist, about being a radio producer, about... We have a question here. How did I end up getting my job? The very first one in radio. The very first job in radio I had was helping out on a show. I helped out on a show that was like... It was like Viz magazine on the radio. It was very naughty, and we got in trouble an awful lot. And I became like a writer and a performer on this show. So we did lots of characters and sketches and things. And it was based in Stoke-on-Trent. And I did it for nothing. At the time, I was an office clerk in Knutsford during the day. I was, 16, 17. And 3 times a week, I would travel from My mum and dad's home in Manchester, down to Stoke. We would be on air at 10. We'd finish at 2 in the morning, and then I'd drive back, get home for about 3:30, and be up at 6 to go and do my office job for a full day. I may have fallen asleep once or twice during my office job. But it was volunteering and just getting in. Now, unfortunately, there's less of that now because there's very few of those kind of radio shows where there is a big gang of people. It's a matter of being, of persevering and of being in the right place at the right time, which I realize is just rubbish advice because it's just like throw a ball in the air and hope that the right person catches it. But that's pretty much how radio is now. The number of presenters that are being used is being cut down, particularly in commercial radio, because there's a lot of what they call networking. When I worked at Heart in Birmingham, it was a 24-hour-a-day station. Now, 2 shows a day, 2 shows a week come from there. The breakfast show and what we call the drive time show, so the one that Steve Denyer does in the afternoon. And that is it. The rest of the time, those studios are turned off, and it comes from London. So it's hard to get in, but it is a matter of just persevering. It's that fine line between persevering and being annoying. And it's a case of being willing to do the things that other people don't particularly want to do. Does somebody want you to make tea, but you don't like making tea? You best learn how to make tea. I delivered bread as one of my first radio jobs for a station promotion. Did I enjoy it? No. But it was something that was going to get me in to the station, make sure the management knew who I was, make sure they were aware of what my name was and what I could do. And then I went from just helping out on this show to becoming a regular part of it. And then I actually got paid for doing it eventually. I became an assistant producer on the show. And then it went from there and kind of grew, and I became a presenter, and, you know, you just kind of grow, and the job gets bigger and bigger. So that's how I started. Any other questions? About? How many people are behind me per show? So, well, if I go through, basically, I'll go through this. So I'm the presenter. I have Lou, who's my main show producer. I have Nishal, who's what we call a broadcast assistant, who's the person who kind of answers the calls, deals with the guests. I have Liz, who's my afternoon producer. I have Emma, who's the breakfast reporter. I have Catherine, who's what we call our radio car reporter. We have Steve, who's our daytime reporter. Now, some of these roles are shared with other shows. But they're just, and then, of course, we have Daz, who does the sport. We have Kevin, who does the news. And we have Lucy, who does the travel. So 9 people, apart from me, who put that show together or who work on that show. It's not always the same 9. Rotas change. I try, the way I like it is I always like it that I'm the presenter. I like to try and keep that role the same. I like the same person to be doing the show producing, which is Lou, and I like the same person to be doing what we call the late producer, which is Liz. And Liz's job is to take the show from 10 o'clock in the morning and guide it through to, she finishes at 6 o'clock at night, and that's when Lou and I take the show and get it ready for going on air the next morning at 6 o'clock. So there is a lot of people, but because breakfast is the biggest show on any station that you listen to, breakfast is the biggest show, it needs the most people. So, and they're all great. They make me sound good. That's what they do, and they do it very, very well. So, any other questions? I can't believe none of you have got a question. Oh. My working day starts about 3:45. As I say, the alarm goes off. I'm normally in work for about 4:15. And then what I do is we just start going through the show. So we'll look at, something may have happened overnight. For instance, the terrible tragedy of the Boston bombings was something that occurred overnight. So when we came in the morning, we had to change the show to make sure we got this news story across in some way. And that's the beauty of it. You've got a prepared show ready for you, but you have to be ready to chuck it out and start again. So we go through the show, we decide on any little changes we want to make, and how do we do something that relates to that day. And one of the questions we ask is, what are people going to be talking about? Because what we like to do is talk about the thing you're talking about. And then we go on air. We're on air from 6 until 9. At 9 o'clock, we have a debrief, or as most people call it, breakfast. And then we have a meeting at 10 to decide what we're going to do the next day. That goes on till about 11-ish. And then I normally have a meeting with my editor and, just catch up with people in the office, because obviously at 4 o'clock in the morning, nobody's in. And then I'm normally gone by about 11:30. What I tend to do is go home and I have a bit of a sleep, because I go to bed at about 10 o'clock at night. So I go to bed, have my little sleep, and then the rest of the day is, because I have my own company, I don't work for the BBC, I'm a freelancer. So I have my own company and I deal with things like that. Or, as it was on Thursday, I came here and did an hour on the BBC WM stage, helping other people become presenters and journalists and newsreaders and sports commentators. And then I get my call into work about 4:30, and then I'm doing that till about 6. My wife gets home about 7:30. I normally have the tea made, and then we just sit and watch Strictly Come Dancing, It Takes Two, until it's time to go to bed, about 10 o'clock. So it can be a pretty full-on day, and that's 5 days a week. Yeah. So, say again. If I'm not there, well, that happened the other week. I was taken quite ill in the middle of the night, about midnight, and I thought, I'm not going to make it into work the next day. So my first call was my editor, and what they do is they get somebody else to do the show. Sometimes it'll be Daz, who does the sport. He will then present the show, and if there's time, there's a gentleman called Richard Wilford who will normally stand in for me. As it was, I was then off for 5 weeks because I was in hospital, but it's somebody else. You've got to give them enough time. But they just put somebody else on the radio, and then that's how they get through it. I don't know how long I've done. Are we 3 or 4 more minutes? Any more questions? We have. Oh, wait 1 second. You first. Sorry. I'm going to come there because I cannot hear you. Go on. What other careers does the BBC offer? So many. Because this is the thing with the BBC. People think of it as the public-facing side of TV and radio. But, of course, it's a massive, massive organisation. What is it you want to get into? You're not really sure. Because, obviously, there is the presenting, there is the journalism, there is the reporting, but there's everything you will find everywhere else. There's IT, there's HR, there is every other office job you can potentially think of. The thing about the BBC, the reason I love working for the BBC is it's so big. It isn't just here, it's global. You go to pretty much any country in the world and you will find the BBC. It's 3 letters that, I think pretty much anywhere you can say, I work for the BBC, and people know what you mean and know what you're talking about. You go to Russia, we have a Russian office. Obviously, we have a massive American office based in Washington. We have offices in New York and LA, and that's where a lot of the reporters are. But it's still an office, and there's pretty much whatever you want to do. A huge IT department. We have the online side of things. We have research and development that we do at the BBC, which is how we can make sure the website, the news app, the iPlayer, the radio player are so good and so up to date, because we have these departments and these people that can bring that to life and bring it into reality. So really, no matter what sphere you want to get into, as long as, if you want to be a jockey, you might struggle at the BBC. We don't have our own race course. I think they used to, but they don't have it anymore. But you can pretty much do anything within the BBC. So, Right, this is the last question. This is the last question. Go on. Say again. Do I get paid a lot? What do you think? When I was first getting into radio, the thing that I remember someone telling me, it goes like this: commercial radio for the money, BBC for the experience. And I don't think it's quite that true. When I first started out in radio, I used to turn up at the station at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I did a late night show. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was on air at 10. I'd finish at 1. And for that, so for my day's work, I used to get £25. Now, at that time, this was late 80s. That really wasn't very much. There was almost everybody else I knew was on more. The thing about radio, the thing that I've always said, I consider myself well paid for what I do because I love my job. The thing I've always said, though, if you ever want to get into radio and do what I do and be a radio presenter, never, ever, ever do it because you think the money's good or you've heard the money's good. You have to do it because you love it, because you're going to do a lot of things for no money that if you're only in it for the money, you're just going to make you miserable. So it's always coming back to money, unfortunately. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, very quickly now. We do have an apprenticeship. We do have an apprentice. In fact, funnily enough, that's something else. We have somebody who deals with people who want to come on work placements and supportive roles. I think they're very careful with their language regarding calling it apprenticeships. But we do have the ability to get people in to see what the job is like. And to be fair, if we get them in as reporters, we do make them work. Okay? And that's it.
I just say I'm the next presenter on apprenticeships, and we do have apprenticeships in the BBC.
There you go.
So I'll tell you about it later.
I don't know. I never did an apprenticeship. My dad would have loved me to do one. He didn't understand working in radio. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being so patient, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.